Part 1. Vested Interest. In Chapter 1, Devin DeLuda, the ducal cofferer, is forced to chase after the Duchess of Rochelle, Genevieve, who impulsively dashes through the streets of Alburn to buy a vest and jacket for her husband. Despite her eccentricity and apparent disregard for norms, Genevieve displays surprising mercantile knowledge. As they haggle with a Callian merchant, a commotion arises when a young boy is caught stealing bread. The Duchess intervenes, demanding the soldiers release the child, citing her own responsibility for the theft. Devin reluctantly pays the baker, and the guards leave, though one mutters a derogatory remark about the Duchess. In Chapter 2, the Duchess and Devin discuss the punishment of a mere child, with Devin explaining the complex racial dynamics in Rochelle. The Duchess defends her intervention on behalf of the child, arguing for the value of all citizens, regardless of race. Devin, however, believes the city's rigid traditions and dangerous political environment require a more cautious approach. The conversation shifts to the eerie local superstitions, including a supposed murdering ghost. Their discussion is abruptly cut short when the carriage is attacked, leading to Devin's death as the Duchess screams in terror. Meanwhile, Royce and Hadrian continue traveling with their prisoner, Virgil Puck, questioning the truth of his claims. Part 2. The Return of the Virgil Puck. In Chapter 1, Royce and Hadrian are escorting their prisoner, Virgil Puck, to Lord Hildebrand after he's accused of a crime he insists he didn't commit. As they travel, Puck argues his innocence and tries to convince them of his honesty, but Royce remains cynical, focused only on the payment. Their journey is interrupted by a group of soldiers who, under the orders of King Amrath, execute Puck without explanation. Royce and Hadrian are left stunned as the soldiers ride off, leaving them with Puck's lifeless body and no answers to the mystery surrounding his death. In Chapter 2, Royce and Hadrian return to Wayward Street after burying Puck, which Royce reluctantly accepted due to Hadrian's insistence. The scene highlights the muddy street, Medford House's new blue paint, and Gwen Delancey's pride in the progress. Gwen is eager to show off the house's new look, despite Hadrian's playful critique of the color. Inside, Gwen mentions Albert is waiting to speak with them about payment for a job they don't remember doing. Royce is distracted by Gwen, feeling a mix of confusion and attraction, unsure of how to handle the shift in his emotions. In Chapter 3, Royce, Hadrian, and Albert discuss an unexpected payment of 8 gold tenants for a job they don't remember finishing. Albert reveals that Lady Constance paid him, but the details remain unclear. Royce and Hadrian suspect something's off, especially since Puck's death occurred after the payment. Albert shares that a mysterious man from Colnora is looking for Royce, and though he didn't provide many details, he recognized the name Riyria. Royce is unsettled when Albert mentions the man called him Duster, a name from his past, hinting at deeper unknown connections. Part 3. The Whiskey Baron. In Chapter 1, Royce and Hadrian meet a mysterious man named Gabriel Winter at the Rose and the Thorn. Winter, a wealthy businessman from Colnora, seeks revenge for the disappearance of his daughter, Genny, who married Duke Leopold Hargrave of Rochelle. Winter believes Hargrave killed her and wants Royce and Hadrian to make Rochelle suffer, as Royce once did in Colnora. He offers a large sum of money for their services, promising more if Genny is found alive. Royce and Hadrian are drawn into the job, despite the uncertainty of Genny's fate. In Chapter 2, Royce and Hadrian prepare for their journey to Rochelle. They discuss the route, the expected weather, and the challenges ahead, including avoiding Colnora. Gwen and the others see them off as Royce shares his uncertainty about the mission, suggesting it could take several weeks. Though Gwen and Royce share a moment of quiet understanding, Royce remains distant, unable to express his feelings. Hadrian observes, recognizing Royce's reluctance to say goodbye. The two friends set off on their mission, leaving Medford House behind. In Chapter 3, Hadrian and Royce continue their journey in silence. Hadrian reflects on their past attempts at conversation and concludes it's not his job to entertain Royce. They stop to set camp, and Royce remains uncommunicative, causing Hadrian to wonder if he's upset. Eventually, Royce admits he's not mad but struggles with his feelings for Gwen. Hadrian presses Royce on the topic, suggesting he's in love with her but afraid of it. Royce avoids a direct answer, but his silence and body language speak volumes, leaving Hadrian frustrated with his friend's emotional turmoil. Part 4. Rochelle. In Chapter 1, Royce and Hadrian journey through the majestic mountains into Melborn, avoiding Culnora to maintain peace with the Black Diamond Thieves Guild. As they near Rochelle, Hadrian reflects on his time in Melborn during his military service. Royce reveals the real reason for their mission: rescuing the Duchess, not a social call. Hadrian learns that the Duchess is likely dead, and Royce cynically comments on the nature of power, love, and wealth. Their conversation turns personal when Hadrian presses Royce about his feelings for Gwen, but Royce remains evasive, hiding behind his usual sarcasm. In Chapter 2, Royce and Hadrian arrive in the bustling city of Rochelle, overwhelmed by its crowded streets and striking architecture. As they navigate through the city, they search for an inn, but every place is full due to a festival. They eventually find a potential room on Mill Street, suggested by a woman sitting in the rain. The woman warns them about the unwelcoming nature of the city and the difficulty of finding accommodations. Despite the rain and growing tension, Royce and Hadrian decide to pursue this lead, eager to find a place to stay before the night worsens. In Chapter 3, Hadrian and Royce find the blue-shuttered building on Mill Street, where they meet an old woman, Evelyn, who rents out a room. After a brief exchange, they negotiate the price, which is initially high, but settle on 6 silver for the night. The woman sets strict rules for the stay: no women, no animals, no drinking, no smoking, and no nonsense. She demands payment up front and warns that any violations will lead to eviction without a refund. The two settle in, with Royce using the alias Baldwin and Hadrian Grimm as they prepare for the night. Part 5. Mercator. In Chapter 1, Mercator Sakara braves a cold, rainy evening in Melborn, reflecting on the harsh weather and her own aging. She meets Erasmus Nym, a Callian merchant, to sell her dyed wool, but he's hesitant to buy due to the early hour and the risk of being seen. Despite this, he gives her some coins for previous work and a blue vest that he can't sell, as it's believed to be cursed. Before parting, Mercator asks if there's any news about the Duke's actions, but Erasmus has nothing to report. She leaves with the money, vest, and a growing sense of urgency. In Chapter 2, Mercator returns to the dilapidated Rookery, a neighborhood inhabited by the Mere, a marginalized group. She distributes coins to the residents, including Seaton, a Mere who struggles with her appearance and the prejudice she faces. Mercator reassures her, sharing wisdom about ignoring the opinions of the masses and focusing on individuals. Mercator also promises Seaton that things will improve, though doubts linger. She refuses food offered by the group, hinting at a secret task she's carrying out alone. Mercator's resolve is clear. She will make things better for her people despite the challenges. Part 6. Over lamb and small beer. In Chapter 1, Royce and Hadrian arrive in a surprisingly luxurious room, noting its expensive furnishings. Royce considers stealing items like the rug, but is reminded by Hadrian to stay focused on their mission. Royce then begins planning their next steps. They need to secure accommodations for their horses, get food, and gather information. Royce suggests that instead of a tavern, they head to a brothel, which he believes is the best place to gather intel in any city. Hadrian, though skeptical, agrees to follow Royce's lead as they prepare for their upcoming tasks. In Chapter 2, Royce and Hadrian struggle to locate a brothel in Rochelle, discovering instead that the church has outlawed them. Hungry and cold, they stop to eat at a rough eatery called the Meat House, where Royce subtly questions locals for information. They learn that the city is filled with nobles due to a bishop's decree that anyone vying for the crown must attend the spring festival. When Royce mentions Duke Hargrave's missing wife, the locals react uneasily and leave abruptly. Sensing tension and unwanted attention, Royce and Hadrian decide to leave, realizing they've stirred suspicion. In Chapter 3, Royce and Hadrian leave the meat house, discussing strange local rumors about a monster killing people and Duke Hargrave's missing wife, Genny. Royce learns the city is packed for the spring feast where a new king will be chosen. They speculate that Genny's disappearance might be part of a larger plot involving the former king's family, all of whom are reportedly dead. While walking back, they hear a runaway livestock wagon racing toward them in a narrow alley. With no escape, they pull up a sewer grate and jump in, narrowly avoiding being trampled. In Chapter 4, Royce and Hadrian are swept through the city's sewer after jumping in to avoid a runaway wagon. Struggling against a powerful current, they finally latch onto a staircase and pull themselves to safety, exhausted and drenched. Realizing they were likely targeted, they speculate that their inquiries about the missing Duchess Genny might have triggered the attack. Royce notes the city's similarities to Ratibor, suspecting that someone doesn't want them investigating further. The encounter leaves them with more questions, confirming that their case involves deeper dangers than a mere disappearance. Part 7. Breakfast. In Chapter 1, Royce and Hadrian sit down for breakfast with Evelyn Hemsworth, who insists on proper manners and giving thanks to Novron before eating. The elaborate table setting and Evelyn's stern expectations for propriety contrast with the duo's more rugged ways. Evelyn mentions the recent death of King Reinhold and his family in a shipwreck, which has left the kingdom under the stewardship of Bishop Tynewell. She explains Alborn's history as the former imperial center in exile and highlights the Surret Knight's presence. Royce and Hadrian realize that political complexities may be at play in their mission. In Chapter 2, Royce and Hadrian hurriedly leave Evelyn Hemsworth's house as Royce insists they need a new place to stay. Royce, suspicious of a nearby slaughterhouse wagon he thinks may have been used in an attempt on their lives, confronts the butcher. Their heated exchange attracts city guards, including an officer, Roland Weiberg, who recognizes Hadrian from the past. Their reunion eases the tension, leading to a conversation in a nearby guard post. Royce and Hadrian suspect foul play, but agree to discuss it further away from the growing crowd, temporarily calming the situation. Part 8. A Tale of Two Soldiers. In Chapter 1, Hadrian and Royce meet Roland, a former comrade of Hadrian's, at a guard post. As they discuss recent events, Hadrian reveals they are searching for Genevieve, a duchess who disappeared 2 weeks prior. Roland confirms Genevieve's carriage was ambushed, her companion killed, and she was taken. The town guards, however, found no trace of her despite a thorough search. Roland suspects political motives may be behind her kidnapping to prevent her husband, Duke Leopold, from becoming king. The chapter ends with Royce indicating they'll investigate further, suggesting the duo suspects deeper conspiracies in Rochelle. In Chapter 2, Royce and Hadrian visit Woffington & Sons, a sophisticated carriage shop, to investigate the carriage tied to the Duchess's disappearance. A young worker named Brian Woffington shows them the ornate carriage, stripped of its plush blue interior, believed to repel monsters. Royce questions Brian, who explains that the Duke's regular coachman, Wimbley, refused to drive the Duchess due to his disdain for her, and another driver took the role that fateful night. The Woffington Sons speculate the Duchess was attacked after leaving the carriage, suggesting she fled out of fear, unwittingly sealing her fate. In Chapter 3, Royce and Hadrian discuss the Duchess's disappearance and Royce's theory that her coach-driver played a role, as servants often go unnoticed in high society. Royce dismisses rumors of a supernatural creature and focuses on finding the driver, certain he's key to understanding what happened. Hadrian notes Royce's tendency to doubt popular opinion, and Royce admits the lack of a body suggests the Duchess may still be alive. Royce also refrains from reprimanding Hadrian for his earlier bluntness, noting that Hadrian's approach yielded useful information, reducing the need for more violent methods. Part 9. The Gold Eater. In Chapter 1, Genny Hargrave, held captive in a small stone cell, sharpens a coin as a makeshift tool while listening for signs of her captors. Reflecting on her violent abduction by Viller, she recalls watching him murder a man, Devon, before she was hooded and taken away. Genny assesses her surroundings and notes that her captors, particularly Viller, are unpredictable and dangerous. However, she sees a potential ally in the woman called Mercator Sicera, who appears more restrained. Genny's instincts and her past experience with dangerous men keep her alert as she hopes for a chance at escape. In Chapter 2, Mercator, a skilled cloth dyer, reflects on her work as she dyes fabrics and deals with the challenges of her life. She finds herself in a ruined church, using its resources to maintain her business of creating valuable blue-dyed cloth, though the process is time-consuming and costly. Meanwhile, she contemplates her responsibility as the matriarch of the Sicera family, feeling the pressure of their expectations. She briefly interacts with the Duchess, who mocks her, but Mercator remains focused on her work. Despite her efforts, Mercator feels the weight of failure, uncertain of how to improve her situation. In Chapter 3, Genny realizes her captors are not weakening her for control, but tormenting her for their amusement. She grows increasingly resentful and reflects on her upbringing and the way men succeed through boldness. Observing her captor, Mercator, Genny learns that the Mere are severely oppressed, denied basic rights, and forced to live in poverty. Mercator reveals that they only asked for the basic privilege to work and live freely, but Genny's husband, Duke Floret, has refused to grant these demands. This revelation forces Genny to confront the injustice Mercator faces and her husband's role in it. In Chapter 4, Genny explains to Mercator that her kidnapping was not a random act, but a consequence of her efforts to improve the city's economy. She reveals her background as a merchant, detailing her plans to boost trade by advocating for the inclusion of Callians and dwarves, whose talents could bring wealth to the city. Genny criticizes the city's refusal to embrace these groups, which stifles growth. She also mentions her confrontation with the Merchants Guild and the murder of her ally, Deluda, by those who would have profited from her proposals. Part 1. O Venlin is Standing. In Chapter 1, Bishop Maurice Salder visits Gromgalamus, where he admires its opulent architecture and frescoes, contrasting it with the much poorer state of his own church in Medford. He meets Bishop Tynewell, who reveals his office also lavishly decorated. They discuss their respective roles and ambitions, particularly regarding the selection of a new king. Salder, tasked with advising Tynewell, suggests candidates including Armand Calder. The two share a meal, and Tynewell reflects on the legacy of past church leaders, including Venlin. Salder, meanwhile, hints at his past involvement in a royal family's downfall. In Chapter 2, Royce and Hadrian navigate through Gromgalamus, with Royce leading the way while avoiding questions. They pass through busy neighborhoods, marketplaces, and narrow streets. Hadrian inquires about their destination, but Royce remains tight-lipped, revealing they are searching for a new lodging. Their conversation shifts to Evelyn Hemsworth, whose eccentricity Hadrian defends while Royce dismisses. Eventually, they find a merchant selling carved figurines, one representing a legendary warrior, Galenti. The merchant tells a tale of Galenti and Rhea Rhys Ramsay, a powerful queen. Despite the distractions, Royce remains focused on the unusual figurine. In Chapter 3, Royce and Hadrian sit down at the Urbanese tea house, where Hadrian suggests trying various local dishes, including Callian liquor and goblin liquor. The two discuss the Callian district of Little Garem, which reminds Hadrian of the vibrant markets of Callus. As they eat, Royce dismisses the story of Galenti and Rhea Rhys, revealing that he's not interested in the past. Their conversation touches on their respective histories and the idea of change. Hadrian reflects on the emotional toll of his past, just as a scream breaks the moment, shifting the focus of the chapter. Part 11. Little Gurem. In Chapter 1, Royce and Hadrian explore the city, with Royce leading a winding route through crowded streets and marketplaces. Hadrian questions their purpose, and Royce reveals he's looking for a new boarding house, dissatisfied with their current lodging. As they pass through the bustling neighborhood of Little Garem, they encounter a merchant selling figurines, including one of a legendary warrior named Galenti. Royce shows interest in a particular statue, while Hadrian focuses on finding food. The chapter ends with Hadrian deciding to leave Royce to his curiosity while seeking out a meal. In Chapter 2, Royce and Hadrian sit down at the Urbanese tea house to eat and discuss the day's events. Hadrian offers food recommendations, including a strange drink called Gurlin Bog. As they eat, they talk about their past, with Royce revealing his disinterest in stories about legendary figures like the Queen of Mandolin. The conversation shifts to their shared histories of violence, with both men reflecting on their actions and the changes they've undergone. Hadrian compares their experiences to spilling tea, suggesting that eventually people must change to avoid making a bigger mess. The chapter ends with a scream cutting through the air. Part 12. Unicorns and Polka Dots. In Chapter 1, a crowd gathers outside an alley where a makeshift livestock pen and stage are set up for a sunset auction. Hadrian, noticing the crowd's unease, moves forward to investigate the source of the screams and wailing. He pushes through the crowd, aided by his size and weapons. At the end of the alley, he discovers a tragic scene. The body of a young girl, clearly dead for less than a day, with her ribcage torn open and her heart missing. As Hadrian surveys the grisly scene, Royce warns him of approaching soldiers, but it's too late. In Chapter 2, Hadrian and Royce are detained by guards after being found near a murder scene. They banter over their differing views of the world. Hadrian remains optimistic, while Royce is cynical. Roland, an old acquaintance of Hadrian, arrives and clears them of suspicion, though the guards remain skeptical. They discuss a series of child murders involving missing hearts, which seem connected to black market rituals. Roland shares a personal story about a woman who gave him boots, revealing the bleakness of their world. Royce asks about the town's gargoyles, leading Roland to share several local legends. In Chapter 3, Royce and Hadrian return to the crime scene in Little Gurem. Royce points out a missing gargoyle on a building, which seems odd given the lack of any evidence of its removal. They notice the pristine gap where the statue once stood, leading Hadrian to consider various explanations, such as a construction error or an unfinished project. However, the absence of the gargoyle raises questions, suggesting there might be more to the situation than it first appears. Royce is intrigued, asking why the gargoyle is missing, hinting at a deeper mystery behind the scene. Part 13. Grom Galamus. In Chapter 1, Viller Orphy waits on the roof of the Trio Vestments building, where he has made his home in a makeshift shelter. He reflects on his life as Emir, a people oppressed and marginalized, and the challenges he faces, including not being able to wear his grandfather's sword without risking violence. He treasures a piece of ancient tapestry, which symbolizes his heritage, and dreams of a time when Mir will again rule a kingdom. As the sun sets, Viller notices a rat attempting to steal from him but quickly safeguards his belongings before preparing to leave. In Chapter 2, Viller Orphy travels to the cathedral for a meeting with Bishop Tynewell. He arranges for Erasmus Nym to access Grom Galamus on the morning of the feast, ensuring the bishop's involvement remains secret. The bishop expresses his doubts but agrees, promising Viller power and recognition if the plan succeeds. Viller leaves the cathedral, feeling the weight of his gamble, and sees two strangers near the estate, observing the area suspiciously. Realizing they are watching for something, Viller decides not to eat and prepares for what's to come, knowing his future and the fate of his people are at stake. Part 14. The Driver. In Chapter 1, Royce and Hadrian wait outside a duke's estate, observing a dwarf they suspect is a carriage driver. When the dwarf exits the estate, they follow him through the city, with Royce explaining his suspicions about the dwarf's role at the estate. As they trail him into a small, cramped neighborhood, they realize the dwarf is part of a close-knit community of dwarves. The dwarf stops at a butcher shop and a firewood stand before entering a tiny shack where he is greeted warmly by a family. Royce discovers the dwarf is a skilled woodcarver, raising questions about his true role. In Chapter 2, Hadrian and Royce continue to follow the dwarf, who now carries a box and moves with urgency. They trail him through the maze of streets until he meets a tall, dark-skinned man at the entrance of a cemetery. The dwarf and the man discuss weapons and a secretive plan involving swords and a mysterious object. The conversation hints at upcoming conflict, with the dwarf giving the box to the man. Just as the two realize they're being watched, a stone block is thrown at them, and Royce leaps into action, scaling the church to escape. The dwarf and his contact flee. In Chapter 3, Hadrian chases the Callion through the dark streets, weighed down by his swords. The Callion, clutching the valuable box, tries to lose him by weaving through alleys and dodging obstacles. Despite the effort, Hadrian keeps up and eventually follows the Callion to a yard. Losing sight of him again, Hadrian relies on sound to track his prey, moving in the direction of a dark street. After a series of missteps, he hears strange noises and is momentarily caught off guard. When he regains his composure, he discovers the Callion's body, now devoid of a face, lying in the street. Part 15. Bird Hunting. In Chapter 1, Royce pursues a cloaked figure across the rooftops of the city, impressed by his target's agility. The chase leads them to a tall building, where the figure leaps through a window and escapes into a strange curio shop. Royce follows, scaling walls and dodging debris as they race higher up the cathedral. The two climb to the rooftop, where the figure revealed to be Emir confronts Royce. In a struggle, the Emir falls to his death, but Royce finds no trace of the body, leaving him to wonder if his quarry somehow escaped. In Chapter 2, Royce and Hadrian meet after separate investigations into a series of mysterious events. Royce, who chased a man only to find his body with its face missing, shares his findings with Hadrian. Hadrian reports the discovery of a box filled with gravel instead of valuable contents. They return to Evelyn Hemsworth's boarding house to find it locked, but Royce uses a key to enter, prompting an accusation from Evelyn. She reveals Amir tried to force entry, claiming to be Royce's brother. Evelyn defends them from the threat, warning them to avoid trouble and be more cautious. Part 16. Looking Away. In Chapter 1, Genny is painstakingly modifying a key while reflecting on her life. She recalls how she rebuilt her father's whiskey business after his withdrawal into bitterness. Despite her success, Genny struggles with her marriage to Leo, whom she now realizes married her out of necessity, not love. As she contemplates her situation, Mercator, her captor, offers her bread, leading to a conversation that reveals the complexities of the abduction and the demands of the group behind it. Despite their tension, Genny finds some comfort in their shared moment of vulnerability, contemplating the uncertain future. In Chapter 2, Mercator is confronted by Viller, who is frustrated with the lack of action from the Duke regarding their demands. Viller insists that compromise is useless and that violence is the only solution to achieving respect and change. Mercator disagrees, warning him that such actions would lead to a war they cannot win and only result in more suffering. She argues for patience and wisdom, but Viller is determined to act. He informs her that the revolution will begin with the Duchess, leaving Mercator to face a difficult choice, uncertain of her role in the upcoming conflict. Part 17. The Gathering. In Chapter 1, breakfast is an unexpectedly civil affair. Hadrian and Royce engage in light conversation with Evelyn, who disapproves of Hadrian's blue scarf, deeming it a foolish fashion choice. She then shares a local legend about the Morgan, a vengeful ghost tied to a historical figure, Glenmorgan III, who was betrayed by the nobility after winning a significant battle. The tale suggests the Morgan haunts Rochelle, seeking revenge on those who wronged him. Evelyn explains that Blue is warned to ward off this ghost and scornfully comments on the superstition surrounding protection for baby boys versus girls. In Chapter 2, Hadrian and Royce continue their search for the Duchess, but progress is slow. They investigate the disappearance of a faceless Callian, suspecting a funeral may reveal more. They visit various neighborhoods, looking for signs of mourning or burial. After hours of searching, Royce reflects on the possibility that the Callian may have had no family. They encounter a blue-collared dog, prompting a brief discussion about loyalty and loss. Eventually, they observe the entire city heading east in response to the bells of Grom Galamus, signaling an event they must follow. Royce and Hadrian join the crowd as night falls. In Chapter 3, Hadrian and Royce follow a parade into the decaying outskirts of Rochelle, where they find a crowd gathered at a ruin. Inside, a tense meeting unfolds, led by Viller, who demands rebellion against the nobility. He argues that blood must be spilled to gain attention and fight oppression. However, Mercator warns of the consequences, predicting disastrous retaliation. As Viller accuses Hadrian and Royce of being spies, the crowd turns hostile and they are captured. Just as things look dire, a young woman named Seaton defends Hadrian, revealing his identity and a past connection, altering the crowd's perception. Part 18. The Rasa. In Chapter 1, Seaton shares her harrowing story of survival during the sacking of Alsworth Castle, where Hadrian, in a moment of unexpected mercy, saved her life. Seaton reveals how a powerful warrior, part beast and part elven, protected her from harm despite the brutality of the invaders. The crowd listens intently as she thanks Hadrian, asserting her commitment to defend him. Tensions rise when Viller demands their deaths, but Seaton challenges him to take responsibility for his own revolution. Meanwhile, Royce escapes his captors, hinting at a trade involving the Duke in exchange for the Duchess. In Chapter 2, Mercator leads an entourage, including Royce, Hadrian, and a dozen guards, to a dilapidated building that serves as the revolution's headquarters. After some discussion, Mercator introduces Selinim, Erasmus's widow, who will represent the Callians. The group plans to prove the Duchess of Rochelle is alive to negotiate with her husband, the Duke, for reforms. Royce and Hadrian suggest using Captain Weiberg to arrange an audience with the Duke. Hadrian offers to stay behind as insurance, and the group agrees to this risky plan, hoping for good fortune to guide them. Part 19. Living Proof. In Chapter 1, Genny reflects on her situation, realizing that escaping may not offer hope, but only prolong suffering. She examines a key she made, uncertain if it will work to unlock the collar around her neck. She anticipates Mercator's return, knowing that if Viller gets his way, Mercator will be forced to kill her. Despite not knowing how to defeat the padlock or survive the potential confrontation with Mercator, Genny's thoughts turn bitter. She decides there is little left to live for and discards the key, resigning herself to her grim fate. In Chapter 2, Genny is startled when Mercator unexpectedly arrives, asking if she can write. Mercator urgently requests that Genny write a letter to her husband, Leo, explaining a situation that might help save lives. Genny learns that Leo may not know she's alive, which causes her emotional turmoil. Despite her doubts about Leo's love, Mercator insists that writing the letter could change the course of events, potentially saving thousands of lives. Genny, conflicted but motivated by the chance to help, agrees to write, though her pain and skepticism about her marriage linger. Part 20. Jiggery-pokery. In Chapter 1, Royce waits in the shadows, observing a festival of rebirth while grappling with his frustrations about Hadrian Blackwater's inexplicable survival and kindness. Despite believing in a world driven by calculated actions, Royce finds Hadrian's luck and survival against the odds unsettling. Royce meets with Mercator, who reveals she has a letter to convince someone of a hostage's survival, but Royce is skeptical. As they talk, Royce notices a gargoyle atop Gromgalamus move, signaling danger. The two are soon forced to flee as the gargoyle begins climbing down the cathedral, prompting Mercator to shout, "Run!" In Chapter 2, Hadrian is interrogated by Griswold Ding, who accuses him of killing Erasmus Nym. Seaton defends Hadrian, revealing that the manner of Nym's death, his face eaten, matches a pattern of murders involving nobles, which Hadrian links to the legend of the Morgan. Griswold hints at ancient dwarf magic, explaining that the dwarves once possessed a forbidden power that could animate stone, creating golems. As Hadrian questions the dwarf's cryptic statements, Seaton suggests that the murdered nobles might be tied to a long-lost magical secret, prompting a deeper mystery surrounding the stone box Hadrian found with Nym's body. In Chapter 3, Royce and Mercator flee through a crowded plaza trying to escape a living gargoyle. As panic spreads, they reach the steps of the gallery where Mercator attempts to enter through a locked door. Royce quickly unlocks it just as the mob closes in. Inside, they find temporary safety, but the gargoyle, a golem created by ancient dwarven magic, is still hunting them. Mercator explains that the creature is made of stone and that it can likely break into the gallery. Royce, unsettled by the situation, demands more information on the golem and the dangers it poses. In Chapter 4, Hadrian learns from Griswold about the ancient dwarven magic tied to the creation of golems. Griswold explains the Night of Terror, when his people were massacred, and how they secretly crafted powerful stone sculptures for protection. These statues, initially seen as mere decorations by the archbishop, were ritually imbued with life as weapons to defend the dwarves in times of need. Griswold reveals that these golems are waiting to be activated when the time is right, serving as a hidden force against their enemies. Hadrian finds the revelation unsettling but understands the gravity of the situation. In Chapter 5, Royce and Mercator face a stone golem controlled by Viller. As the golem relentlessly attacks, Mercator realizes Viller's true intentions were never peaceful. The golem kills her in a brutal display of violence. Royce narrowly escapes the creature by climbing to the roof, where he faces the golem in a dangerous standoff. Despite the golem's strength, Royce uses a dagger, Alverstone, to pierce the golem's stone skin, throwing it off balance. He survives by stabbing the slate roof, preventing a fatal fall, while the golem crashes down. Royce continues his escape, but the situation remains perilous. Part 21. The Duke. In Chapter 1, Royce and Roland Weiberg arrive at the Governor's Isle to seek an urgent audience with Duke Leopold. The estate is grand but unusual, with open spaces and a lack of typical defenses. The guards and Chamberlain are uncooperative, but Royce sneaks past them, reflecting on his partnership with Hadrian. After a tense exchange, Royce locates the Duke in his library. The Duke, initially suspicious of Royce's late-night visit, dismisses the threat of violence. Royce hands the Duke a letter from his wife, signaling the start of an important discussion. In Chapter 2, Royce waits in a cold, lavish parlor after receiving an unexpected reprieve from the Duke. He reflects on his original mission to kill Leopold, but is now uncertain about his path. The Duke eventually arrives, casually dressed, and reveals that Royce's former employer, Gabriel Winter, despises him. Leo shares that his wife Genny is alive and has been working on a plan to reform the city, but she has disappeared. Royce insists on proving Leo's intent to act, and Leo suggests bringing proof through the city's merchants. Royce prepares to leave with Captain Weiberg for the next step. Part 22. The morning after. In Chapter 1, Hadrian wakes in a cold, cramped cellar with Seaton and Griswold awaiting their fate. Tension rises as voices approach and Griswold readies a dagger, suspecting betrayal. Royce arrives and reveals that Mercator has been killed by a golem, leading to accusations against Griswold. The group learns that Viller, the third person who knew how to raise golems, is behind the violence. Griswold explains that golems can only be summoned on consecrated ground, like sacred sites, and warns of the risks of losing control over them. The group resolves to stop Viller before another golem is unleashed. In Chapter 2, Hadrian and Royce discuss their next steps while walking through a city preparing for the first day of spring. Hadrian, still groggy from lack of sleep, teases Royce, but Royce reprimands him for putting himself in a dangerous position by offering to act as collateral during their last mission. The conversation shifts to the search for Viller, who knows the location of the missing Duchess. Royce is frustrated by their lack of leads, but Hadrian suggests that Viller may be hiding in an ancient, forgotten site, prompting Royce to consider someone with knowledge of Rochelle's ancient history. Part 23. A Prayer to Novran. In Chapter 1, Hadrian and Royce arrive at Evelyn's home, where she chastises them for being late. After a tense exchange, Royce explains their recent mission to save the Duchess of Rochelle from a mere named Viller who plans to unleash a deadly stone golem at the Feast of Nobles. Evelyn, initially skeptical, believes them and suggests they search for an ancient map at the gallery that may help them locate Viller. Royce warns her to leave the city for her safety, but Evelyn refuses. The chapter ends with them leaving, still on their urgent quest. In Chapter 2, Hadrian and Royce enter the Imperial Gallery, finding it in disarray, likely from the destruction caused by the golem. They ascend to the third floor to search for a map, which is revealed to be a large, detailed tapestry of the area, showing an ancient version of the city with a mysterious circular temple. The map hints at the temple's significance, though its purpose is unclear. Royce and Hadrian discuss their next move, deciding to search for the temple. They also realize time is running out before Viller's planned attack at the Feast of Nobles. Part 24. Haunted. In Chapter 1, Oswald Tynewell, the Bishop of Alburn, reflects on his final day in the position before he plans to seize power. As the cathedral empties after Mass, Oswald prepares for what's to come. He reflects on his dissatisfaction with his role and his decision to crown himself ruler despite the consequences. He acknowledges his isolation and the risks of angering the aristocracy and military. Oswald discusses his strategy with two voices, Novran and Venlin, who advise him to eliminate rivals and secure support, including from Garrick Gervais, to solidify his rule ahead of the upcoming feast. Part 25. Keys and Coins. In Chapter 1, Viller wakes up in pain after using a golem for a longer than usual period. He discovers a stab wound on his chest, which he cannot explain, and reflects on his recent actions. Viller had been trying to stop Mercator and a foreigner from reaching the Duke, fearing their success would ruin his plans. He had used a golem to kill, but now faces the unintended consequences of his actions. With the feast approaching and his plans faltering, Viller prepares to kill the Duchess of Rochelle, seeing her as an obstacle to his ambitions. In Chapter 2, Genny grows suspicious of Viller's behavior after he arrives at Mercator's place alone, bloodied and acting strangely. Viller performs a ritual with mysterious ingredients, causing a cloud of white smoke to emerge. He appears to fall asleep afterward, and Genny, realizing something is wrong, begins working on a plan to escape. She tests a set of coins and a key for breaking locks, determined to act before Viller wakes. Her uncertainty is palpable, but she pushes forward, knowing her survival depends on it. When Viller finally wakes, Genny fears he's searching for Mercator. In Chapter 3, Viller struggles to open the locked door, frustrated by Mercator's precautions. He finds the key hanging on the wall, grabs a small knife, and finally unlocks the door. Inside, he expects to find Genny, but the blanket-covered figure is wrong, too small, and not what he anticipated. Upon closer inspection, Viller realizes Genny has escaped, leaving behind cut hair and the empty collar. She tries to lock him in, but he bursts through the door, knocking her down. He's enraged, ready to kill her, and taunts her. "Time to die, you fat cow." Part 26. Haggling. In Chapter 1, Hadrian and Royce trek through difficult terrain, growing frustrated with the heat and their fruitless search. They discuss their feelings about the people in the city, enjoying a festival while they suffer in the wilderness. The conversation turns to their past actions, including their roles in saving each other and the darkness that surrounds their choices. Hadrian believes in the value of kindness and happiness, while Royce argues that recognizing darkness is essential for survival. Their debate is interrupted when a woman's scream echoes from up the hill, signaling that something urgent has happened. In Chapter 2, Viller nearly makes a fatal mistake when he is tricked by a decoy made of blankets and straw, thinking the Duchess is still locked in the room. As he enters, she slips out. After realizing his error, he rushes after her and a violent struggle ensues. The Duchess, a heavy woman, fights back fiercely, knocking Viller off balance and even throwing urns at him. He manages to regain control, grabbing her by the hair and raising his knife to strike. However, he is interrupted when two strangers, armed with weapons, burst into the room. In Chapter 3, Viller holds the Duchess of Rochelle hostage, threatening to kill her unless Royce and Hadrian drop their weapons. Royce argues that killing her wouldn't benefit Viller as it would lead to his own downfall. Genny suggests a deal where Viller releases her and they lock themselves in a cell for safety. After some negotiation, Viller agrees, and the group enters the cell. Genny kisses Hadrian in gratitude before explaining she needs to find her husband, Leo. Hadrian urges her to stay put for safety, warning of the potential danger if Viller creates another monster. He then rushes to find Royce and Viller. Part 27. The Spring Feast. In Chapter 1, Genny struggles to escape after being trapped for weeks in a cell, her body weakened from lack of food and exercise. She pushes herself to run, despite her exhaustion, and eventually stumbles into the neglected Rookery district. Despite the rundown surroundings, she finds solace in the wildflowers growing there. As she runs, Genny reflects on her relationship with Leo, her husband, questioning his feelings for her. She worries about his future at the festival and her place in his life. Ultimately, Genny realizes she's alive and free, despite her doubts about Leo's love. In Chapter 2, Bishop Oswald Tynewell watches the grand banquet preparations from above, feeling uneasy about the ceremony that's about to unfold. He worries about the role of magic in the upcoming event and his association with the dark arts, despite his need to bend rules to achieve his goals. As the crowd below anticipates his appearance, Oswald is startled when the statue of Novron comes to life, terrifying the plaza. The statue begins killing nobles, causing panic and chaos. Oswald, horrified by the sacrilege and massacre, runs to the cathedral's doors, unsure of what to do as more statues arrive. In Chapter 3, Viller is focused on controlling the giant statue of Novron, reveling in the destruction it causes. While operating the golem remotely, he is unaware of Glenmorgan's arrival until the massive figure tackles him. Despite Viller's initial advantage, Glenmorgan relentlessly attacks, breaking pieces of Viller's golem. Viller realizes that Griswold, a dwarf with knowledge of golem creation, is trying to stop him. As the battle continues, Viller uses his experience to fight back, understanding that stone doesn't choke, but crushing and falling are effective strategies in his battle against the ancient warrior. In Chapter 4, Genny arrives at the plaza to find chaos as Novron's statue kills the crowd. Despite warnings, she continues searching for Leo among the bodies. She finds a wounded man and drags him to safety, but Novron's relentless destruction forces her to act quickly. Realizing they won't escape in time, Genny directs the man to crawl into a drain for safety, while she distracts the golem by shouting at Viller. With the statue closing in, she attempts to reach a nearby carriage shop for shelter, but exhaustion causes her to collapse just as the statue nears. Part 28. Hide and Seek. In Chapter 1, Royce and Hadrian search the ruins for clues about Viller's whereabouts, unsure whether he returned to the city or hid in the forest. They explore a strange, overgrown temple with an intricately crafted stone dome. After finding signs of a recent fire, they realize Viller must have doubled back, waiting for them to leave before returning to the temple. The two men search the ruins but find nothing, leaving them to wonder where Viller has gone next. Royce is determined to find him, knowing that loose ends can't be allowed to remain. In Chapter 2, Genny watches in disbelief as the statue of Novron, instead of crushing her, charges away. She crawls over the cobblestones and encounters Armand Calder, a wounded nobleman. Despite his pain, he tells her that everyone has been killed by the golem, but Leo Hargrave, Genny's husband, wasn't among the victims. He never showed up to the gathering and was out looking for her. Overcome with relief, Genny vows to protect Armand and ensure his survival, while feeling a renewed sense of hope knowing Leo is alive and still cares for her. In Chapter 3, Royce and Hadrian continue their search for Villar in the ruined temple, but find no trace of him. Outside, they hear the pounding of the marble statue of Novron, which appears to be alive and charging toward them. The two hide inside, realizing the statue is unable to enter the temple. Royce deduces Villar must be hiding on the dome's roof, where the golem can't reach him. To stop the golem, one must distract it while the other climbs. Hadrian volunteers to be the distraction, leaving Royce to climb and confront Villar despite their tense exchange. In Chapter 4, Hadrian distracts the marble golem, Novron, by running out of the temple and leading it into the thickets, hoping to slow it down. Meanwhile, Royce climbs the temple's dome, expecting to find Villar, but the roof is empty. Hadrian finds temporary shelter beneath collapsed stones, but the golem digs toward him. Back inside, Royce grows frustrated as he searches for Villar, realizing time is running out. He suddenly remembers the piles of wool and begins to consider they might be hiding something. Royce's focus shifts, knowing he must find Villar before it's too late. In Chapter 5, Hadrian is forced to flee as the marble golem, Novron, destroys his shelter. The golem freezes when its connection to Villar is broken. Meanwhile, Royce watches the burning temple, having realized Villar must be hiding underneath, not on the roof. The two deduce the temple is a tomb, with a secret entrance for the burial chamber. As they observe the fire, they see Villar stumble out of the temple, but he collapses before escaping. Royce confirms Villar is dead, ending the immediate threat from the golem. The mystery of the tomb and its occupant remains unresolved. In Chapter 6, Genny, recovering from the chaos, finds two boys and sends them to help the injured Armand Calder. She walks downhill, overwhelmed, and breaks down at the river. People begin returning to the plaza, and she reunites with Leo, who thought she was dead. Leo confesses his love, but reveals his doubts about their marriage due to his inability to provide her with a fulfilling life, including children. Genny reassures him, expressing that she wants him, not a title. They embrace, and Leo admits his love, leading to a passionate kiss, solidifying their bond. Part 29. Winter's Daughter. In Chapter 1, Evelyn informs Hadrian and Royce that they must leave her house due to potential trouble with the Surete, who might hold them responsible for recent events. Before they can protest, the Duchess of Rochelle, Genny, arrives, offering gratitude for their role in her rescue. She shares news that her husband's men found the ruined temple, two bodies, and the statue of Novron, which killed many nobles. Genny offers them 75 gold tenants as compensation, refusing to return to her father's side. She talks about her plans for reform in Rochelle, including helping marginalized people like the Mere. In Chapter 2, Hadrian and Royce prepare to leave Hemsworth House, where a mere mother has taken their room. Hadrian checks on Dancer, their horse, while Royce humorously insists on checking his saddle. The two discover a dog, Mr. Hipple, in a pauper's graveyard, which sparks memories of Lady Martell. They discuss the mysterious deaths of Martell and Puck, and speculate on the identity of Erasmus Nim's killer. As they leave the city, Royce suggests Lady Martell may have been buried anonymously due to her disfigured face. They head west, with Hadrian recalling their past experiences and agreeing they'll never return to the city.